We started this, like I said, about 3 months ago, and then towards the end of the project, it was getting a little bit stressful because then we started to hear from friends and from companies that other companies were going to be doing the similar trail bike buyer's guide. I feel like if you completely hate a bike, chances are it wasn't the right bike for you as opposed to the right bike in general. And that maybe Specialized knows something that we don't. Maybe they know that SRAM and Shimano are going to be discontinuing cable drivetrains in 3 years or something like that. However, you can't do that with 170 millimeters of travel. There's too much travel. It's going to feel very inefficient. It's going to feel a little bit sloppy out on the trails. And what's up, you guys? Mo Awesome from Awesome MTB. Welcome back to the channel. Just want to give a huge thank you to you guys for all of the positive feedback on our Awesome MTB Trail Bike Buyer's Guide. That was a ton of work. We worked on that thing for about 3 months. And yeah, we weren't really sure how the final product was going to turn out, and seeing all that positive feedback from you guys was really awesome. I did mention in the video in a comment section on our community tab that I would be doing a follow-up video to answer some of your guys' questions. Now, if I sound a little bit weird right now, or if I sound like I have a lisp, I've been getting a lot of dental work this winter. If I sound weird, that's the reason why. Now, I'm not going to make this video video dependent, so if you just want to like play this in the background while you're listening to it, you can do that, treat it as a podcast. So yeah, there's not going to be too many visuals. I'm just going to be answering some of your guys' questions. Another thing I need to ask you guys, if you guys head over to our website, awesomemtb.com, we've actually been posting a ton of information there that hasn't made it onto the channel. So that's going to be more blog articles, opinion pieces, written reviews. So yeah, check out awesomemtb.com. Hannah and I have been putting in a ton of work over there. And yeah, let us know in the comment section what you guys want to see next year. I'm sure we will do a 2025 video, what to expect from us. But yeah, if you guys have a certain review or a certain topic that you want us to touch on next year, let us know in the comment section. With that being said, let's get into some of your guys' questions from the Awesome MTB Trail Bike Buyer's Guide. Now, the first thing isn't necessarily questions. We got a lot of comments comparing our Trail Bike Buyer's Guide to a few other media companies out there. Now, there's a lot of cool media companies out there. A lot of people are doing really awesome work. I do want to say, though, that we had no idea that other companies had Trail Bike Buyer's Guide when we were making ours. We started this, like I said, about 3 months ago, and then towards the end of the project, it was getting a little bit stressful because then we started to hear from friends and from companies that other companies were going to be doing the similar trail bike buyer's guide. And so the only thing that we were worried about was if the bikes were going to be exactly the same, was the information going to be too repetitive. I did actually talk to Drew from the Lone Wolf towards the end of our projects. I heard they had a field test coming out as well. Talked on the phone, theirs was a SL e-bike related. So I was like, okay, sweet, bikes aren't going to cross over there. But yeah, just kind of putting that out there. We thought about this thing about 3 to 4 months ago. I know other media companies did it as well. So yeah, responding to a couple of those comments is always interesting when reviews overlap. So the next question is going to be, why didn't Trek make the list? So if you guys ever see a bike not make it to our channel, like if you're seeing no reviews from this company, chances are we have no contact to that company, and we've probably tried. Trek is actually one of those companies that we would love to start working with them. We've actually reached out a couple of times through friends who are dealers, so bike shops, and then also a couple of people that we've met in person at events. It just doesn't seem to make it to the marketing department. A lot of these companies, especially the bigger ones, are very structured, and so they'll have individual marketing departments, and yeah, it's tough to get some of those contacts. We're not necessarily the biggest media company out there. For 2025, Trek is actually one of the companies we would really love to work with. So if anyone knows anyone there, if Trek's watching this video or anything, be sure to get in touch. Link in the description. The next question is going to be, if you do this again, can you do a shootout that stays below 5K? I'd love to see who wins that one. So for the 5K price point, some of the bikes in this buyer's guide actually were under 5K. So the Propane Eugene and the RA Delano Peak both fell under 5K, as well as the Cannondale Habit. So next year, we do have plans to do a budget trail bike buyer's guide. I guess the question to you guys is, do you think budget, should we stay in like the $2,000 to $3,000 price point? Should be under 5, or should we do multiple of those? So yeah, let us know in the comments what you think, but yeah, stay tuned for a budget buyer's guide next year. Now, next question is going to be component hierarchy value performance comparison. So I actually had a whole segment in our conclusion video that was supposed to be component related, and we ended up cutting it before we released that video just because we wanted the actual conclusion video to be very bike specific. We wanted to do more about the actual bikes themselves, how they rode, where we think they rode best, rather than the actual components. I feel like when you're reviewing a bike, that's something to keep in mind. At least I try to. I try to think about like, okay, how is the personality of the bikes? I know people are going to build their bikes up very differently. So yeah, I feel like it's somewhat unfair to solely dictate a bike review based off of the components it's rocking, although that does play a big part. We actually released that unseen footage on our second channel. I believe it's Awesome MTB Extras, and that's where footage that didn't make it into our main channel goes, because sometimes we have good footage, we want to put it somewhere, so it makes it on there. Now, I do want to do a component video in 2025. I just don't know. Do you guys think it would be more interesting if we did it like component specific, like a fork video, a wheel video, a drivetrain video, or would you guys like it all grouped into one. So yeah, let us know in the comment section, but stay tuned for that. Now for this comment, not sure if it would be in the scope of this video, but I'd love to hear some tie-in to your XC shootout, especially where you compare the same brand across XC and Trail. The bike ride feel, geo, and suspension have similar feels. What differed? Now that's a very interesting question. I will say it's interesting for a company like Yeti, right? Because their XC bike, the Yeti ASR, is a single pivot bike, and the Yeti SB140 is Switch Infinity. So obviously those two rode very differently. The Yeti ASR felt like a really awesome endurance bike. It didn't necessarily have the most crazy suspension design, but I really felt like I could push that bike. It was just a tad simpler suspension-wise. The Yeti SB140 is just like this crazy high-performance suspension design. So yeah, in between those two bikes, not necessarily so. I would say if you take something like the Pivot, so Pivot submitted the Pivot Mach 4 SL for our XC shootout and the Switchblade. Both of them have DW link. Both actually ride very similar in terms of suspension feel. Obviously the geo numbers and the overall travel really make those bikes differ, but those felt more similar than the Yetis, if that makes sense. All right, now this question is, can playing with shock spacers and air pressures fundamentally change the characteristics of a bike? Can you make a plush bike more efficient by stiffening the shock? So yes and no. I do think that shock spacers and different suspension setups can change how a bike rides. I have my personal preferences. I like to set up my bikes a little bit on the softer side, but obviously if you set your bike up a little bit firmer, it's gonna be a little bit more pedaling efficient. And that's where it comes down to the reviewer to really identify like what you're feeling with the bike. Is it basically due to the rear suspension setup? Is it due to how you're setting up the suspension? Certain bikes like the Yeti SB140 like to be set up a lot differently than like a bike like the Pivot Switchblade. The Switchblade I feel like I can get away with a little bit of a softer suspension setup, where the Yeti prefers to be set up a little bit more firmer to make that thing feel a little bit more plush. So yeah, I feel like really dissecting each bike and figuring out how each bike wants to be set up is very crucial. Now I will say something that can actually change the characteristics of a bike more so than suspension is going to be the actual overall build in terms of wheels. So I've found that bikes that have a little bit more of an active suspension design benefit from carbon wheels a little bit more so than bikes that are more pedaling efficient. So like take the Yeti SB140 and the Pivot Switchblade. You can run that bike with carbon wheels or alloy wheels. They both feel pretty efficient, and yeah, you don't change the ride drastically. However, you take a bike like the Specialized, which has a little bit more of an active suspension design, the Specialized Stump Jumper. If you put carbon wheels on the Stump Jumper, that's going to end up doing, it's going to take the Stump Jumper that's a little bit more downhill confident, a little bit more of an active suspension design, but it's going to give it a little bit more pep in its step on acceleration, especially with that lighter wheel set, and that's something I noticed. So I tried the Stump Jumper with an alloy wheel set and then a carbon wheel set. The carbon wheel set drastically transformed that bike. So yeah, it's always interesting playing around with components on bikes. So yeah, I feel like that makes a little bit more of a difference than suspension setup. Suspension setup, I still feel like you can feel how a bike wants to ride, but in terms of the actual build, that can drastically affect how it rides. What suspension system seems to work better on trail bikes? 130 trail bikes, DW Link, Horselink, Yeti Infinity, VPP. I really think it's dependent. I really do feel like each one of these suspension designs has its pros and cons. For like a 130 mil travel bike, it's funny, those shorter travel bikes almost rely a little less on suspension. When we did the XC Buyer's Guide, all those bikes had 120 millimeters of travel. Suspension did play a part. However, there's only so much travel where you can really feel what's going on with the suspension, as opposed to like a longer travel bike. Say you're testing at like a 170 millimeter enduro bike, a little bit more time to feel what's going on a bike, and I feel like suspension design plays more of a part in those longer travel rigs. The shorter travel rigs, I would say you could actually go a little bit more active in the suspension design. That's why I think you can get away with a single pivot in a cross-country bike, and then you're also making the bike lighter overall. However, you can't do that with 170 millimeters of travel. There's too much travel. It's going to feel very inefficient. It's going to feel a little bit sloppy out on the trails, and I feel like suspension design is a little bit more crucial as you have more travel. In that 130, I like DW Link, I like Yeti Infinity, I like VPP, and I really like Delta suspension that's found on those Evil bikes. I feel like that suspension design is magical, and you guys know that. Now, if you have to ride one trail bike like a commuter bike, which one is best? For example, we ride paved bike trails for miles, and some days we hit single tracks and we don't have room for two bikes. What I think this guy's asking is what bike would be best to commute to the trailheads and then still be able to shred the trails. Now, that's actually really important to me. I don't really like driving to trailheads, so whenever we're posted up somewhere, I'd prefer just pedaling to the trails, even if it makes the ride a little bit longer. Now, something like that, I feel like the Pivot Switchblade is an amazing option. Pivot bikes definitely are a little bit more efficient, or something like the Yeti SB140, anything with a more efficient suspension design. I do think you can actually get trail bikes and enduro bikes on this style if you have a lockout. So you can either manually lock out your shocks, but where I think the industry is starting to head, maybe we'll see in a few years, and I feel like there's a lot of potential for it, you're starting to see a lot more electronic suspension. Now, I don't necessarily think you need electronic lockouts, but I do think having a lockout, like a remote lockout on your bike, is pretty transformative. I remember in the XC shootout, that's when I first started to really appreciate remote lockouts. Lock everything up super quickly on the way to the trails, and then you can just open it up with a twist of your grip. I don't think the actual lockouts, there hasn't been one ergonomically that I've fell in love with yet, but I would like to see more trail bikes and enduro bikes start to get remote lockouts, because I feel like that can really transform how a bike rides. Which bike would you take to ride South Mountain National Trail up and down? I mean, I feel like I have to say Pivot here because that's their backyard. For South Mountain, I think a wide variety of bikes will do well out there. I think the Rocky Mountain Instinct would do great out there. I feel like the Specialized Stumpjumper, both those bikes have more active suspension designs. That Transition Sentinel would be a great South Mountain bike. Anything that has a decent amount of traction, but at the same time too is still efficient, so you can make those punchy, techy climbs. And also a bike that you're not necessarily going to be as scared to crash on, because I have crashed at South Mountain. That place wrecks you and wrecks your bike as soon as you hit the ground. I don't know what it is about the dirt out there. It's kind of like a cheese grater. That was one of the few places, I don't ride with gloves and I don't ride with knee pads. As soon as I touched the ground, I don't even think I moved that far, but I had a bunch of trail rash. As soon as I got up, I was basically bleeding from my elbows, bleeding from my knuckles. That gravel type dirt out there will chew you up. So yeah, just be sure that you're not too emotionally attached to your bike if you're going to take it out to South Mountain. Now, does a trail bike need adjustable geo? I do think that I appreciate adjustable geos. I really like that the Rocky Mountain had adjustable chainstays. I really like the Stumpjumper, has a few different adjustments you can make, so does the Giant. Bikes like the Yeti SB140, like the Pivot Switchblade, like the Candle Habit that have a little bit less adjustments you can make to the geo, I feel like those bikes specialize a little bit more so in their category. Bikes like the Stumpy, I think, are trying to be a little bit more versatile in different categories. Do I think you need it? I think if you like to tinker with your bike, or if you like to mess with different adjustments, say that you travel a lot, I feel like it's something that you're gonna appreciate, especially if you travel to a lot of different places. Like if I was to go to Whistler in the summer and then spend all winter in Phoenix and then maybe go to Florida for the spring, say I do a lot of different traveling, which we do currently, I would say that's, I don't know, it's nice being able to adjust things, but at the same time too, if you aren't a tinker, you get confused, you get overwhelmed easily, or you wanna just kind of be set and forget, I would say it's not gonna be important to you. Someone said ride some different trails. Now, I was completely burnt out of that test loop that we had for that video. I did a lot of testing on different trails before we did the actual filming. That's the fun part. What you guys end up seeing is the same thing over and over and over again. The reason is so that you can see each bike on the same section of trails. I feel like it's a fair test. So yeah, that's why we use the same trails. I do ride a bunch of different trails. They just don't end up on video. Personally, like how you're able to describe the best use cases / geographies for each bike. This is gonna be a big one. I am a firm believer that bikes are region specific to an extent. I just feel like if you look at a company and where they're located, chances are you look at their backyard, you're gonna get a good idea of how those bikes are gonna ride. Oftentimes companies are passion based. We did an article for this for our website. Now they will try and make bikes well-rounded so they can perform well in like a wide variety of terrain. However, at the end of the day, chances are their preferred terrain is probably gonna be similar to the terrain found in their backyard. Definitely think you should keep in mind geo, like if you take a bike like the Pivot, you look at their backyard as South Mountain, clearly their bikes excel at chunky terrain. And then if you look at a bike like Transition, or if you look at a bike like Evil, clearly they want to ride more techy, fast, high-speed, rooty terrain. Now the Transition with the Sentinel, that tried to become a little bit more well-rounded this year by going a little bit steeper on the head angle, a little bit higher on the BB. Obviously, bikes are starting to head in that more well-rounded direction, but I don't think there's anything wrong with making bikes that you want to ride, especially as a company. I just feel like that's where passion meets product. Yeah, I think it just makes better bikes at the end of the day and just makes a wide variety of bikes for people to enjoy. Now someone says, I was surprised the Ripmo didn't make the top 3. What do you think knocked it down in comparison to the Yeti or Switchblade? Now, I will say I definitely tried touching on this on our Ibis Ripmo review. I feel like at the end of the day, the test bike I ended up going with, which was the size large, was too small for me. I really don't like being the person testing the wrong size bike and kind of giving feedback based off of that. However, what led us to put that review out there was the fact that that would have been the exact bike that I would have purchased. If I was in the market, I didn't have a chance to test the bike, and I was just looking at the geo chart, the reach and the top tube length of the Ibis Ripmo in a size large was actually the same, if not larger than all the other XLs in this test. And at the end of the day, it just didn't feel like that out on the trails. I think Ibis introducing that extra medium kind of threw off the sizing chart a little bit. Based off of their research, 80% of their customers fall in that medium to large range, which makes sense why you would want to kind of introduce a third so you have a little bit more options. I do think though that if you were an XL before, you're probably still an XL now. Once again, I'm 6'2" with about an 805 saddle height, and I 100% feel like I would be an XL. Now, in terms of comparing that bike to the Yeti and the Switchblade, as well as the Stumpy, those were the three winners of the test. The reason why it fell below those is those other three bikes just fit me so insanely well. And at the end of the day, like I said, the large Ripmo is what I would have gone with if I would have bought the bike. So yeah, it was tough to compare all those four bikes. I do think that that new Ibis Ripmo is one of the most capable 29ers Ibis has released. I really did like that bike. I do think in an XL, it's going to perform very awesomely for me. And we do have plans to bring you guys a follow-up XL review next year. Someone says, this is a proper trail bike review. Love the format. This is how it should be done. Did I miss best climber and or most efficient? I did add it to the end of the video, but it was the Yeti SB140 and the Pivot Switchblade. I feel like the Yeti SB140 is more efficient at fire road style climbs. It just has, man, it's crazy. Just through that shock open, it's just such an efficient pedaler. I do think that the Pivot Switchblade is more efficient out of the saddle sprints. It just tightens up. It just becomes like this XC race monster when you're out of the saddle sprinting on the Switchblade. Both are very efficient, and yeah, I think those are the best climbers. Someone says, I do really appreciate that you put an equal emphasis on advanced riders and new riders. Now, this is something that I definitely want to touch on because I feel like it's really important, is how user-friendly is the bike, because certain bikes have a little bit bigger of a learning curve than other bikes. That doesn't necessarily that they're not new rider friendly or they're worse than other bikes or affects the actual performance. It's just that those bikes take a little bit longer to figure out how they like to be ridden. So those are going to be bikes like the Yeti SB140 or the Pivot Switchblade. Those are bikes that you're going to have to spend a little bit more time learning about its personality. And if you're a new rider out there and you get onto those bikes, those I feel like are a little bit more high performance. If you're a new rider, you might not appreciate them as much right away. They're still amazing bikes. You're going to have an amazing experience. But if you take a bike like the Candle Habit or the Ari Delano Peak or even the Specialized Stumpjumper, as soon as you hop on those bikes, you pretty much know how that bike rides. And yeah, you can just kind of push it right away, where the Yeti and the Pivot Switchblade, it's going to take a little bit of time to figure out how those bikes want to ride before you can just get out there and fully pin it full confidently. But then those Yeti and the Switchblade, I feel like those have a little bit kind of a higher scale of performance. Great series, thank you. Would love to see the review of the Hightower V4. We have tried so many times to reach out to Santa Cruz. We're obviously not reaching out to the right department. We've tried reaching out through friends who are dealers. Once again, the bigger the company, chances are the more departments they have, and getting in touch with the marketing department is very tough. So if you're Santa Cruz watching this, or if you're a Santa Cruz dealer or something like that, you want us to review Santa Cruz bikes, definitely get in touch. Comment, thoughtful reviews and awards. Great job overall with the series. It's a shame that the Stumpy doesn't allow cable rear derailleur. I like my Shimano drivetrain, so that rules the Stumpy out for me. So the Stumpy won best trail bike of 2025. I really do feel like that is the best trail bike of 2025. I feel like it's going to stoke a wide variety of riders out there, from beginners to pros, people who live in the desert, people who live in the PNW. I feel like that is a very versatile bike. The Genie rear shock makes a lot of sense to me. I feel like that shock feels amazing. I feel like if it didn't have the Specialized logo on it, more people would be inclined to run it. I feel like because it has the Specialized logo on it, a lot of people would like to think of it as like a proprietary rear shock. It just feels like Specialized wanted it developed and they got Fox to develop it. Specialized is a big company. They're able to have the resources to make that happen. And I really do feel like if Fox had released the Genie rear shock without that Specialized logo, everyone would be running that Genie rear shock. With that being said, I dissected the Stumpy extensively. I honestly don't understand why there's no cable ports on the carbon version. I just couldn't get a good answer to where I felt made sense. You can argue that it's an aesthetics thing, it just looks cleaner. You can argue that the future of the industry maybe is heading towards wireless. Maybe Specialized knows something that we don't. Maybe they know that SRAM and Shimano are gonna be discontinuing cable drivetrains in 3 years or something like that. It just seems like one of those things that would have been so easy to put. I honestly feel like if Specialized had released that carbon Stumpy with cable ports and without a Specialized logo on the Genie rear shock, I don't know how patent works, so that would be complete. I mean, I understand why they want it, because they developed it. They spent all the money and all the resources developing that Genie rear shock with Fox. So I would understand that you would want to be a part of that. I just think that if that rear shock didn't have the Specialized logo, if that frame had cable ports, It is, I can't imagine a single thing that people would complain about the Stumpy. Thanks, great review. Would like to see a bike with a little bit less travel, like 120 to 130. Now, this is gonna be the most requested, I would say, buyer's guide or next buyer's guide for us is gonna be that 120 to 130 millimeter trail bike category. I think this is gonna be an awesome thing. We just gotta figure out where we want to shoot it, because I wanna try and mix things up. We like shooting in Aliso, but it would be cool to shoot it on some different terrain. So I don't know, what do you guys think? We were thinking about maybe shooting it in the desert. Is that something you guys would be interested in? If you guys have any good recommendations, let us know. We would basically need a place for about a month to shoot this thing, or who knows, maybe our new home base will be ready by then. Someone commented, the best trail bike is always the most efficient. Get to the top with less fatigues, allows the rider to perform better downhill. Now, I will say, I don't necessarily fully agree with this. I do love pedaling. I do think that efficient bikes are definitely up my alley. With that being said, I mean, if we're talking about like that trail bike, 140 to 150 millimeters of travel category, depending on what trails you're riding, say I was gonna be riding like Whistler. This summer, we lived up in Whistler all summer. We basically rode the valley trails, which are outside the bike park, until about 4 p.m. We had a twilight season pass, which lets you into the bike park from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. I only had one bike with me that needs to ride valley trails and the bike park. Out there, you're gonna want something a little bit burlier, and that's where a bike like the Transition Sentinel, the Specialized Stump Jumper, those bikes are gonna be a little bit more well equipped for that. Bikes like the Pivot Switchblade or even the Yeti SB140 might not necessarily be the best bike to bring for an environment like that. I feel like getting into the bike park, you're gonna want something a little bit more active. So yeah, I definitely think what you're gonna wanna look at is what are you riding, and just be honest with yourself. What does your everyday terrain look like? And that's gonna be the best way to kind of pick the right bike for you. This person says, in 2025, the all-in technology has advanced so much, it's hard to buy a bad high-end MTB. It's all up to personal preference. Thanks for putting out energy into this awesome content. I couldn't agree with this comment more. In 2025, we're almost in 2025, as crazy as that is, I don't feel like any such thing as a bad bike. I feel like all of these bikes have been tested by so many different people. They've been tested by the pro athletes that ride for the companies. They've been tested by marketing managers. They've been tested by company CEOs, by all of the employees, the staff, friends of the companies before they actually make it to market. And you really need to be confident that you're putting a bike out to market that, man, a lot of people were stoked on before you put it out there. That's why, I don't know, I try to be pretty careful with our reviews. I just feel like if you completely hate a bike, chances are it wasn't the right bike for you as opposed to the right bike in general. And that's why for me personally, I feel like I'm always trying to keep in mind, okay, do I not like this bike, or is it the bike itself? And most of the time it's the fact that I don't like a bike because I have my own personal preferences. People always ask like, well, why don't you like say what you want from your bike? I want to ride vertical steep climbs that are very prolonged. I want to put in big miles in the saddle, just go up just crazy, just messed up type 2 fun trails. I like to do a lot of hike bikes. And I like to ride very techy, slow speed tech. That's like my favorite type of riding. Once again, if I'm using that as the baseline for every bike, it's just not gonna be applicable, and I don't feel like that's a fair bike review. I feel like in my eyes, what a bike review is an analysis of that bike. And you're almost like a scientist to a degree, where you're basically like dissecting a bike. You're saying, how does it ride downhill? How does it ride slow speed? How does it ride high speed? And so yeah, I feel like in 2025, there's no real such thing as a bad bike. It's just about, is it the right bike for you? And once again, you gotta be honest with yourself. How does your riding every day look? And that's gonna help out pick the right bike for you and your riding style. This comment is, hey Mo, thanks for the great review of the bikes. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom. You mentioned that the Yeti SB140 lunch ride had what felt like a bottomless suspension or something like that. My question to you is whether it's capable at bike parks like Snow Summit. Also, how would you differentiate this bike from the LaSalle Peak? Also thoughts on the Spectral CF8. So I've never ridden the new Canyon Spectral. I think we tested Canyon bikes like 7 years ago, so I can't speak on that bike. I will say in terms of the Yeti SB140 itself in bike parks, I would definitely opt for the Yeti SB160 if you're gonna be riding a lot of bike parks. Like you say you ride Snow Summit, if you take a Yeti SB140 or any 140 mil bike into Snow Summit every week, you're gonna be using and abusing that bike, and you're probably gonna walk away with a lot of wear and tear, and that's any 140 mil bike. Snow Summit definitely beats your bike up from what I remember from riding in that park. So I would opt for the Yeti SB160. From what I've heard, the 160 climbs very similarly to the 140 in terms of efficiency. But yeah, I would look for a little bit more of like a 160 millimeter travel bike if I was to ride Snow Summit a ton and I wanted like a more bike park style trail bike. How does the 140 compare to the LaSalle Peak? I mean, very different. The LaSalle Peak is a 170 millimeter travel bike. The Yeti is 140 millimeters travel. Now this person comments, every bike apparently is in insane, poppy, and capable. Fun review though would be helpful to be more specific on what is insane about the bike. That is why we did the independent reviews. So this was actually on the conclusion video. If you go into our independent reviews, I actually dissect each bike, and I feel like I do a good job of describing each one, hopefully. Now, in terms of my reusage of the words insane, poppy, and capable, there's not too many like other terms to kind of want to use for bikes. I mean, obviously a bike is going to be very capable, it's going to be very poppy, playful. Planted is a common used word in reviews. I wanted to substitute some words for those words, like insane. I guess I could have used mind-blowing. Poppy, I could have used like jumpy. I don't know how I would substitute poppy, like, I don't know. So I guess I would use jumpy instead of that. And capable, I mean, confident, I feel like I try and substitute it with that. Capable, what's another word for capable? I don't know, I feel like there's certain words when you're reviewing bikes that's tough to get away from. At least I don't use the word quiver killer like every other word. Now this comment's a little longer, this is just me, but I thought you guys did a great job. And for someone like me who's not personally looking for a new bike, I really enjoyed the content of your videos. I enjoyed them so much that we lost our internet here where I live in the Philippines. And I had most of the bikes downloaded in the test. And after watching them, instead of just deleting after watching, I waited for our internet to get fixed just so I could properly give you a thumbs up. We went to the Philippines last year, I believe. I can confirm that Filipinos are as friendly as this comment. They were some of the nicest people out there. So yeah, reading this comment just brought me back to our time in the Philippines. Shout out to all our Filipino viewers. And so that's all the time that we have for today. Those are some of the comments we wanted to go over. If you guys have any other comments, let us know in the comment section. Maybe we'll do a follow-up to this follow-up video. We also have been toying around with the idea of starting a podcast, so definitely, yeah, leave us those comments. Let us know what you want us to do next year. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry if I sound weird. Once again, that dental surgery. Thank you guys so much for watching this video and subscribing to the channel. Big plans for 2025, so be sure to be subscribed. Check out our website, awesomemtb.com. And with that being said, until next time, you guys, ride awesome. You.